Good afternoon. This is the Slavery Archive Book Club, hosted by me, Ana Lúcia Araújo, and Alex Gill, who is here with us. Today, we are here to discuss this new beautiful book, Cultural Legacies of Slavery in Modern Spain. This is an edited book, co-edited then by Akiko Tsuchiya and Aurélie Vialette. Then Akiko, she is professor of Spanish at Washington University in St. Louis, and she is co-editor with Michelle Murray of the book Unsettling Colonialism, Gender and Race in the 19th Century Global Hispanic World, also published by SUNY Press, because this book that we are discussing today is published by SUNY Press. And Aurélie Vialette, she is an associate professor in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at Yale University, and she is the author of Intellectual Philanthropy, The Seduction of the Masses, which was a 2019 recipient of the North American Catalan Society Prize for an outstanding work in the field of Catalan studies. So today we are here to discuss this book that was just published this past January. And as a co-edited book, this is a book that has then chapters of a number of authors, including Benita San Pedro Vizcaya, Christy Hooper, then Aurélie Vialette herself, Martin Rodrigo Alarria, and Juliana Nalerio. And this was then translated by Maria Cristina Orjuela. We have also a chapter by Akiko Tsuchiya, another chapter by Ulrich Schmieder, a chapter by Jeffrey Coleman, and another one, chapter on public policies in Spain, how is the colonial past addressed, then with several authors, then Oriol Lopez Badel and Celeste Munoz Martinez, interviewed by Akiko and Aurélie. And then we have several other chapters, then also some of them translated, one by Gustavo Nerin, another one by Rosalia Cornejo Parriego, another one by Tania Safura Adam, and another one by Inca S. Graves, and finally the last chapter by Miguel Angel Rosales. So some of these chapters were written in English, others were translated. And some of the authors, they are also here with us. And you are going to start the session with a presentation by Akiko and Aurélie. And after that, we are going to have our session, then the Q&A. And Alex, who is my co-host, let me just add him here. And so you see that we'll be moderating the chat and also moderating the questions. Welcome, Aurélie and Akiko. I will add you and then remove myself.
Thank you so much for this kind invitation. We're happy to be here and happy to see many of the authors of the book as well.
Well, we're really, again, I want to, thank you, Ana Lucia, and also Alex. We're really grateful for the opportunity to speak to this group about our book and to engage in dialogue with you all afterwards. So again, thank you very much for being here. We're really happy that our book on the cultural legacies of slavery in modern Spain has finally seen the light. It was published by SUNY Press in January of this year. And we're fortunate to have the opportunity to collaborate with a stellar group of scholars, cultural practitioners, and grassroots activists from both sides of the Atlantic on this project. And in spite of the challenges of the pandemic, we found great solidarity in the group's commitment to bring to light the lives, histories, and stories of enslaved individuals who've been silenced and to reckon collectively with the legacies of these past injustices in the present moment. We thank all the participants of the volume, many of whom are here today. I see Benita, Juliana, Ulrike, Rosalia, and I'm sorry, I don't see everybody because of the way the screen is set up, but thank you so much for being here to support us. We're also thrilled that the Spanish translation of this volume will be published in the fall by Editorial Icaria in Spain in the Esclavitudes series, edited by the historian Martin Rodrigo, which will allow our work to reach the Spanish-speaking public. We're also working on a digital initiative, which will to complement the volume to make this project accessible to a broader public beyond the Academy. So our plan is to design a bilingual website with 3 components. First, a map of memory sites of slavery in Spain, accompanied by a timeline of events related to those sites. Secondly, links to digital archives with historical documents. And thirdly, a blog on current events related to how Spanish society is confronting the legacies of slavery today. We think the very nature of the topic calls for public engagement, as it's impossible to get the public, especially in Spain, to understand the cultural legacies of slavery without addressing how society and its institutions have shaped the public memory of slavery during different periods of history. So why this project and why right now? As many of you know, the legacies of slavery have been at the center of public debate in our own country, especially in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, which precipitated a national as well as a global awakening to the problem of racial injustice. Since then, we've witnessed a very slow and difficult national reckoning with the legacies of slavery and institutionalized racism. The works of Black Lives Matter in particular has had a significant global impact in shifting the public's attitude toward the problem of racial violence and discrimination. Since then, statues of slave owners, Confederate leaders in the US, and colonizers have fallen or have become the object of public controversy. There have been renewed debates over the renaming of schools, buildings, and streets named after those with historical ties to slavery. And some politicians have begun to discuss reparations to the African American community, though unfortunately these discussions have come to a standstill in the US with the current administration. And universities have begun to grapple with their own connections to slavery, with a number of them advancing efforts to understand and respond to their role in slavery. And some of those efforts have included archival and genealogical research about the descendant community, and also a number of oral history projects.
I'm sure many in this group know about the University Studying Slavery Consortium established in 2016 by University of Virginia's President's Commission on Slavery and the university. This consortium is committed to uncovering institutional ties to the slave trade, to enslavement on their campuses, and to racist practices in institutional history. Another important goal is to educate the community and to allow for collaboration on projects that promote reconciliation and repair. Since 2016, more than 100 universities, mostly from North America and the UK, have joined the University Studying Slavery Consortium. Both of our institutions, Yale and Washington University in St. Louis, form part of this consortium. Many institutions of higher learning, Georgetown, Harvard, Princeton, Brown, among many others, have had to face some difficult truths concerning their institution and their founders' connection to slavery. Some of these institutions were founded by slave owners or created through proceeds coming from plantations and the sale of enslaved people. Others were built and maintained through slave labor or had colleges or buildings named after enslavers or pro-slavery politicians who became the university's benefactors. The reason we're mentioning the US situation to contextualize our work on Spain is because we felt that it was important to acknowledge our own position and work within these institutions that have benefited from the labor of enslaved individuals and that owe their existence to the capital of benefactors who were enslavers. Though our book focuses on Spain, our project arose from the need to rethink our own and our society's relationship to history, and to bring to light the history of a community that's been erased and invisibilized. We believe that academic scholarship can and should participate in this act of reparation in order to achieve historical accountability, not only for the crime of slavery, but also for its continuing legacies in the present.
So both in the US and Spain, we're currently seeing concerted attempts to erase the history of slavery. But all of us in this group know that slavery isn't a past that we can forget. Joe Scott has said that we can't assume that the past is past and that the ghost of slavery haunts all subsequent American history. Along the same lines, we're reminded of Ta-Nehisi Coates' word in the case of reparations that, quote, what is needed is an airing of family secrets, a settling with old ghosts, unquote. In fact, in writings of James Baldwin, Saidiya Hartman, Toni Morrison, among others, there are repeated references to slavery as a ghost that continues to haunt present-day society. This need to reckon with the old ghost of slavery applies not only to the US, but also to the history of other nations, including Spain, that have been sustained on colonialism and slavery. I think we need to first acknowledge the connection between past and present injustices to be able to accept historical accountability and combat systemic racism. A lot has been written on the cultural legacies of slavery in the US, Latin America, especially in the Caribbean, and in some of the other European empires, but less so on Spain, in spite of its having been a major colonial power since the 15th century and engaged in the practice of slavery and the slave trade until the end of the 19th century. Spanish historians of slavery, some of whom are contributors to our book, have done painstaking archival research to uncover the role that slave traders played in shaping the Spanish society and economy. But fewer scholars have focused specifically on the cultural manifestations of this legacy. And coming from the fields of literary and cultural studies, both of us are, Aurélie and I are in literary studies, that's where our training is. We wanted to emphasize the ways in which this past has also left its imprint on cultural representations and institutions in the Spanish state. We found Ana Lucia's work on the public memory of slavery to be very useful in contextualizing our work. We refer to her point about the political nature of public memory as a way, quote, a way the past of a group is lived again in the present, unquote. And that's from her book on politics of memory, making slavery visible in the public sphere, public space. At the same time, we know that shifts in social and political attitudes can transform public memory. Araujo notes that what progress has been made in the past few decades in raising the public consciousness about slavery and its legacies on American, European, and African soil often took the form of local, smaller scale initiatives launched by anti-racist and historical memory organizations willing to take up the issue of colonial memory. This is certainly the case in Spain, which has long been lacking in major state-sponsored programs or cultural projects to bring out the collective memory of slavery into the public space for a long overdue reckoning. There's nothing in the Spanish state that's equivalent of the International Slavery Museum in Liverpool or the Abolition of Slavery Memorial in Nantes or our own National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. But in the last 10 years, there have been a number of efforts on the local level to force Spanish society's reckoning with its colonial enslaving past. Many of these initiatives are based in Barcelona and have included special exhibits, slavery routes organized by historical memory organizations, artistic projects originated from members of the African diaspora in Spain, and grassroots groups organizing to topple monuments related to colonialism and slavery. Some examples of these cultural projects include Tania Safura Adams, and she's one of our contributors, Radio Africa, and numerous exhibits curated by her that explore Black diasporas, migrations, and African popular music. Some of you may have seen her recent exhibits on our Requiem for Humanity, Dehumanizations, Power, and Black Futurisms at the Casa Encendida in Madrid. Another important project was the documentary Negres, La Cataluña Esclavista, aired on Catalan Public Television, with the participation of several contributors to our volume.
Since the turn of the 21st century, the field of modern Iberian studies has produced a steady stream of publications on the Spanish Empire and its colonial legacies, of which slavery is a significant aspect. But much of the scholarship on slavery's impact in the Hispanic world has centered on Latin America and on the early modern period in Spain. Michael Zusk was the first historian to employ the concept of the hidden Atlantic, which refers to the hidden space of illegal transatlantic slave trafficking. This concept was important in challenging the common misperception, particularly among those focused on the Anglophone world, that the 19th century was the age of abolition. In the Iberian world, the transatlantic slave trade flourished as a lucrative business in the 19th century, especially after the US and Britain banned the slave trade. The concealment of the hidden Atlantic as a site of the slave trade from the early modern years to the 19th century in Spain is one of the reasons for the general lack of representation of the Iberian Atlantic in the modern period. In Cultural Legacies of Slavery in Modern Spain, we consider the manifestations of the legacies of slavery within a broad cultural context that includes literature and the visual arts, dance, the mass media, magazines and radio programs, monuments and memorials, museums, tourist routes, historical archives, memory initiatives, and the increasingly vocal anti-racist social justice and immigrant advocacy movements in the Spanish state. Our contributors include literary critics, historians, anthropologists, colonial studies scholars, filmmakers, a dancer, cultural practitioners, and grassroots activists engaged in broader historical memory initiatives. The book includes scholarship, interviews, and a work of creative writing. The contributors address the question of how culture produced in the Iberian Peninsula or in its overseas territories from the 19th century to the present both reflected and shaped the ways of understanding the history and the heritage of a nation sustained on colonialism, slavery, and labor exploitation.
So ours is the first book-length study that addresses the cultural legacies of slavery in the modern Spanish state. On the one hand, our goal was to create an archive of cultural memory sites of slavery and its aftermath. But beyond the creation of an archive, we wanted to ask how the recovery of these hidden stories might transform our vision and understanding of the Afro-descendant community's place, both in the national history of Spain and in the global history of transatlantic crossings and forced migrations. So in addition to scholarly essays, we thought it was important to include authors from outside of the academy to represent the broad range of work that's being done on the ground by the cultural practitioners themselves. The latter group includes journalist and cultural critic Tanya Safura Adam, whom I already mentioned, flamenco dancer and theorist Yinka Essie Graves, who explores flamenco from an African diasporic perspective in her choreography, and Oriol Lopez Badel and Celeste Munoz, who are key players in the organization European Observatory on Memories that's engaged in promoting human rights and democratic memory. Lopez Badel has also created and led the first guided historical tour of sites linked to colonialism and slavery in Barcelona through his work for the Knowing History Association, which is another historical memory organization. Finally, we include a creative essay by filmmaker Miguel Angel Rosales, who in 2016 directed Gurumbe, Canciones de tu Memoria Negra, a documentary about African slavery in the Iberian Peninsula and its cultural influences on flamenco.
Concretely, the book is divided into three main sections. First, the legacies of slavery in the archive. Second, confronting the legacies of slavery in cultural memory sites. And third, interpreting the legacies of slavery in literature, music, and visual culture. We want to give you a glimpse into some of these chapters to whet the appetites of those who haven't read the book yet. Part one is about the role that the institution of the archive has played in both concealing and exposing the long-lasting impact of the transatlantic slave trade. By bringing to light these archival materials, we can begin to map the global networks of slave traffickers that have been hidden from public view until now. Benita San Pedro's chapter centers on the Black body and Black labor to reconstruct the social history of Guinean domestic works. She places their narratives at the center of written traditions in Spanish colonial Africa. Kirsty Hooper draws on the archive to shed light on the activities of Spanish merchant families with connections to the slave trade who established themselves in London during the 19th century. She shows how their involvement in the Spanish slave trade was obscured by administrative documents, and she traces their cultural and material legacies in London. My own work in the archives of the slave trader Antonio Lopez y Lopez exposes the intricate web of global networks of the slave trade, but also shows how the archives can be manipulated to conceal those networks. The last chapter in this section by historians Martín Rodrigo and Juliana Nalerio traces the evolution of racial thought in the 19th century and early 20th century from Cuba to Catalonia to show how these ideas from the past continue to mark racial concepts and categories in the present. Their analysis of archival sources shows that colonial slavery affects persons of African descent and is one of the sources of racism in modern Spain. Part 2 turned to recent cultural initiatives and activism around the memory sites of slavery and colonialism in Spain, and how they've become spaces for critical reflection on the past. Akiko shows how activism around those monuments in Barcelona, those of Antonio Lopez y Lopez and Columbus, have shifted public memory. She analyzes public controversies and shows how political and cultural initiatives have transformed how communities experience history in public spaces. Ulrike Schmieder, for her part, focuses on toppled statues of enslavers and colonizers in Madrid and Cadiz to ask why confronting the legacies of slavery has been so difficult in Spain. He draws on interviews she conducted with those engaged in the politics of memory in academia, museums, local politics, art, the Afro-Spanish movement, and the Afro-Cuban diaspora in Spain. Jeffrey Coleman's chapter is on the role of the Museo Atlántico in the Canary Islands and shows the paradoxes of the museum as a space that both memorializes and erases Blackness. For him, the underwater museum evokes a parallel to the Atlantic slave trade, yet its inaccessibility undermines its purpose of commemorating Black life and death, and instead objectifies Black bodies. Part 2 ends with an interview with Spanish historians Oriol López and Celeste Martínez Muñoz on the European-sponsored European Observatories on Memories, who reflect on the problem of how public memory policies addresses or doesn't address the colonial past in Spain. They address the loss of historical and democratic memories, as well as the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement in Spain. The last part, Part 3, analyzes how Spanish literary authors, filmmakers, and other cultural producers represent slavery and of its hidden legacies in their works. In this section, we include 2 interviews with cultural practitioners and a work of creative writing by a filmmaker. Anthropologist Gustavo Nerín chapter is a comparative study of historical and literary representations of the famous Spanish slave trader Pedro Blanco. He complicates the stereotypical portrayal of the slave trader by highlighting the ambiguities in the representation of this figure. His chapter is followed by that of Rosalía Cornejo Parriego, who zeroes in on the representation of enslaved Black children in Western art, more specifically in Goya's paintings and in Carmen Posada's novel La hija de Cayetana. Rosalía emphasizes the commodification of female Black bodies in her essay. Tania Safura's wonderful interview argues for an understanding of Blackness as a political project by displacing the center and thinking through music, photography, and art. One crucial claim she makes in her interview is the importance of the Black person becoming a subject and not being relegated to the status of the object. Another interview in this section with the flamenco dancer Yinka Essie Graves explores this art form as an embodied performative expression that brings the diasporic experiences of the Afro-descendant communities to life. Her choreographies make space for the freedom of the people of African descent by fighting against this erasure. Finally, the filmmaker Miguel Ángel Rosales reflects on his approach to uncovering the African traces of flamenco in his documentary work. Through his creative essay, he challenges the Eurocentric frameworks through which flamenco has previously been perceived. His text reframes his documentary Gurumbe by uncovering the African traces of this genre. You can see from these descriptions that these cultural practitioners, artists, academics, and grassroots activists in Spain shed light on the legacies of slavery through a variety of cultural, urban, and academic initiatives. These inquiries, not surprisingly, have created discomfort for some politicians and the general public, who've resisted coming to terms with their nation's past slavery practices, let alone think about making reparations. For this reason, we think the topic of this book could not be timelier in bringing these issues out in the open.
We want to conclude this presentation by explaining why we think it's important to address the impact of slavery in the cultural realm. Culture has been key to shaping social attitudes, structures, and institutions, and to producing narratives about identities of social groups and defining power dynamics between them. At the same time, culture serves as space for representing what's been left unspoken or concealed in public discourse, and as such, it has a potential to challenge and reshape dominant social narratives. It has a potential to shift accepted versions of history written by the colonizers and the role of Afro descendants in it. Culture can then become a space of critical reflection on the legacies of slavery. So ultimately, we hope this book will allow its reader to achieve a deeper understanding of colonialism and its consequences in the contemporary culture of the Iberian Peninsula. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aurélie and Akiko. And now, of course, we can start the Q&A. If you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand and you can come on video. You can also post your question in the chat, but we prefer that you ask your question then on video, because like this, we can see each other.
Yeah, and maybe to warm up the engines, get you comfortable in your seats, I can get us started. Because
Go ahead.
I have questions. And now, I was lucky enough to be at a book launch for this book a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, that we did here in the department, because me and Aurélie are colleagues here at Yale. And it was the most well-attended event of the season. I was so happy to see that. But of course, because I didn't get a chance to ask questions because everybody had questions. So I got all my questions now. So I can start. I actually I have specific questions, and I know that Ulrike and Benita are in the room, so I can also we can bring them in at some point if they want to answer some questions. I got conversations for them as well, so maybe I'll save that for the second round. But the first round is the very general questions to you, Akiko and Aurélie. Actually, it does connect a little bit to Ulrike's essay because one of the things that comes out when you read all the essays is the gaps, right? There's so many gaps. And in Ulrike's chapter, of course, she talks about how there's a lot of academic gaps that may be affecting how there's cultural gaps. So there, in Madrid and in Cádiz, there were a lot of statues that people missed. Like, for example, people didn't go after the royals. People didn't go after Alfonso XII or none of this stuff, and they just left those statues alone. And these people had like thousands and thousands of slaves, right? And I think the reason that is adduced is that maybe the historical gap was too big. So the question overall to you guys as editors who have been have the bird's eye view, and anybody in the room is what kind of concepts or theoretical framework would you consider to explain this kind of historical gaps lead to cultural gaps lead to gaps in memory that then shape activist movements in the present. What concepts would you decide to explain that kind of transmission of gaps from one sector of society to another? Starting with assuming that we historians take on the bulk of the responsibility, right? Like we should be the ones trying to fill in as many gaps as we probably can. Not only historians, academics in general. Yeah.
So
I don't
could
know.
you,
It's a
the question,
complicated question.
it's a long, yeah, but could you like kind of ask the question, right? I know you said a lot, but
How will you theorize the transmission of gaps of like
yeah.
like historians have not been doing their job in Spain with slavery in Spain, not at the level of like you see in many other places, right? Like you see a lot more academic activity in other places, but not in Spain. That comes through in your work, right? And then what I saw was that when that lack of work in the historians then becomes lack of cultural knowledge of like just like
Yes.
people even young kids educated on the streets or even the cultural
Exactly.
producers, they like don't know. Like sure,
Mm-hmm.
El Marqués de Comillas, sure, famoso, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody like yeah,
Mm-hmm.
bad guy.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
then how do
Mm-hmm.
you skip like Alfonso XII or something like this? Like, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's because
Yeah.
the knowledge is not filtering
I
down.
get your question now.
So
Yeah.
the question
Yeah.
is, how do you
Yes.
conceptualize, you guys who have the
Mm-hmm.
bird's eye view, how do you
Mm-hmm.
speak about this kind of transmission of gaps? Uh,
Now, how should we address it or what is actually happening? What
Take
leads
it
to the
either
gap?
way.
Okay.
Address it would be like
So,
how to fix it.
okay. Yeah. No, that's
Yeah,
not an
you
easy.
can do
Yeah.
that. You can answer that too, if you
But
want to.
yeah. So the first part of addressing the gaps, it has a lot to do with the education. There's nothing in the curriculum of like the primary and secondary schools except for in very except for basically in the Basque Country and in Catalonia, there has not been any kind of educational initiatives to include that part of history in the school curriculum. So that explains, and that of course trickles up to higher levels, right? Even the university level. So that's one thing. I think education, just like in this country now, the government is trying to erase certain parts of aspects of our history. So very little has been done to include those, and partly because there's many different reasons. One, of course, is that they don't know anything about it. They don't know about this history. And secondly, because those who feel themselves to be implicated don't want that to be exposed, right? And so there's a lot of different aspects to why these questions are not being addressed. As far as solutions, I think education is one, but it's also, again, very, very difficult, like in the primary and secondary, the obligatory education to actually include those things in the curriculum and to take a course from Martin when you're a graduate, postgraduate student is not, is too late, right? That's not going to reach. So it's great, the work that's been done by historians who are working on this, like Martin, and there's Ulrike, many others. Not many, but the people who have done this historiographical work. But I think in society as a whole, there's still such a deep denial and this attachment to colonialism, the lack of imperial nostalgia and lack of questioning of colonial framework, that it's very, very hard. It's been hard to make these inroads that others have been able to make. And the other thing is that compared to like the US, where we have a large African descendant community and an activist community, over there's this notion that, oh, that's something that happened. That's not, there's no slavery in Spain. It's something that happened over there in the Caribbean, over there in the US. And the way they even talk about racism, oh, it's something that happens outside of Spain. That's something like, they watch Mississippi Burning and say that's where racism is, or that's in the Caribbean. It's not something that we're dealing with right now, right here. So,
Yeah,
and that's only a partial answer, but yeah.
Yeah, I would add that maybe to answer your question about what we propose. I mean, what I understand is when you say what concepts or theoretical framework we use or we would propose, the book itself says something, right? What we've tried to do with the book is to close one gap, maybe, right? By including a diversity of actors. So, one thing, there's research that has been done. I mean, I don't think, you say historians, they haven't done their job. I don't agree. I think they do.
Yeah, they have.
Everyone does their job, but the dialogue needs to keep going and be done maybe better. And I would say as well that it's a domino effect. So there's a performance of closing the gaps that happen with the historical moment we are in. And right now, for instance, in Barcelona, there's this exhibit at the Maritime Museum. It's titled La Infamia. So it's an exhibit on the role of Barcelona during the slave trade. And they've called historians, I mean, Martin Rodrigo and others, to do a day in July with people from the academia and others to just reach out to the community. So it's kind of divulgate what research has been done and what it proves and what can be transmitted to the public. So these initiatives are truly important, as we show in the book with other initiatives, what is done on the radio, what is done on the ground through those tourist routes. So I think that dialogue, being out kind of the ivory tower, in a sense. I mean, the book is published by a university press, so it's still an academic book, but we wanted to make room, and we explained that very well to the publishers. We wanted to make room for other kind of production of knowledge, and I think that this production of knowledge closes some of the gaps, not all of them, but participates maybe in trying to close those gaps that the authors themselves are presenting to us. So that's how I would answer your question. And I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but
no, I love it, and I agree. It is. I asked the question because the book brings cultural and history like so close together that I asked the question.
Right, and there are some of the cultural practitioners also have had, like Gurumbe, Miguel Angel Rosales. That's had quite a bit of impact, right? On the African roots of flamenco. People don't typically think of flamenco in Africa. So, and then a lot of the projects that Tanya Adam has been and continue to be involved in, that is a way of bringing, in the MACBA, for example, in the Modern Contemporary Museum of Art in Barcelona, and a lot of the exhibits, those are very important in bringing the whole issue out to the public, just as the, the Infamia exhibit in the Maritime Museum, in which I think, Martin Rodrigo was very heavily involved in that as well. In fact, so those are things that are, and apparently the attendance to that exhibit, I read on his site, has been it's been very well attended. And apparently, so those kinds of initiatives are extremely important in bringing, and then of course the documentary film, De Rares, all those things are part of, many different ways in which people in different, everyone from cultural practitioners to historical, members of historical memory organizations to scholars, historians, anthropologists, are bringing this out to the public. It's not, our book is not meant to just stay within the academy. So, and then with our digital project, we hope to bring it out even, further to even a broader public. That is our hope, at least.
Well, I see Emilio has his hands, and then Juliana, and then Rosalia. I think I saw her raise her hand.
I'm answering to this question.
Yeah, go ahead,
so I don't know if
okay,
Emilio is answering to this. So I don't want to. If Emilio is answering, fine. But so I don't know, or if it's
go ahead, Rosalia.
Go ahead, please, Rosalia.
Okay, one of the things, going back to this question about the gap, I do think that historians have been doing the work. But one of the reasons why it might not reach a more public space, public sphere, and even education is because we continue to live in Spain with this idea that our type of colonialism, our type of imperialism was different. Okay, that so we lack humility. I'm just appalled to see how Spain still is not catching up on some of the things that are being done in Europe. I'm not even mentioning the United States, but even in Europe, in the Netherlands, etc. Okay, because we're still dealing with this idea of exceptionalism, that our colonialism wasn't that bad, etc., etc. And as I said, the lack of humility. I'm not going to talk about an extreme case that like Ayuso, but even when our king, when the king goes to Puerto Rico a couple of years ago, and they continue talking about our colonial project, etc., etc., in a very arrogant way. So it is very difficult to have those studies that the historians are doing reach the public sphere. And in education, I'm again very appalled, because I did my high school in Spain. I studied Filología Hispánica in Spain. So I did read a lot of all the literature, okay? And what I always tell also my students here, we did not get the training, and apparently students still are not getting trained. You need to learn where to look and to ask the question. So why did I study or read in high school, university, I don't know how many times, at Lazarillo, and nobody pointed out or led me to question, why is this white guy doing there as a Lazarillo's stepfather? So and it seems that even today in education in Spain, it's still not happening. I mean, I started asking the questions when I arrived in the United States to do my PhD. I was not trained to look at certain things that were pointing towards that, towards the existence of slavery in Spain, etc. So that was not highlighted. We were not looking at it. It was there, but we were not seeing it in our cultural products. So it is just unfortunate that it seems that we continue like that in Spain. So just wanted to add to, I don't know if that explains some of the gap.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rosalia. I will never again say that historians are not doing their job.
Oh, they are.
Sorry,
Definitely.
we don't agree.
I have been corrected.
Yeah, but I would like to add something. Just I will not be long, but memory and cultural memory and public memory is not about historians. Historians, and especially about one historian bringing the debate on reparations and bringing the debate on slavery and all this. And it could have been like 20 historians doing this work, and it's still this would not be visible necessarily in the public space. I think that the case of Portugal, which had a clear role in the Atlantic slave trade and the biggest role along with Brazil, there is a context that is a little bit similar. But let's. I don't want to take more time. Then let's see who is next.
I think Juliana had her hand, right?
Emilio is next, and then after that, Juliana, and then Benita. So Emilio first. Okay, go Emilio.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Emilio Vivo. I just defended my PhD at the University of Antwerp, where I was working actually on Francoist literature on Equatorial Guinea and the Philippines. And I love the book, and I think it's very necessary in a way. And I was wondering how the reception of the book has been until now in Spain. Because I hear a lot of criticism of the Spanish academia, but from my own experience, I do see that many people coming mostly from memory studies are getting interested in the cultural legacies of Spanish colonialism, right? Mostly beginning from the Francoist colonialism in a way. And I just heard that you are going to publish a Spanish edition of the book.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, when the book is out in Spain, we'll know really the impact that the book will have. And it's translated as we speak. It's being translated and it will come out in October. So it's pretty short, the timeline. Akiko and I were interviewed for a newspaper there, Contexto. It just came out. So it's little by little making its room, but I haven't heard anything precise other than colleagues really happy to read it. But other than that, Akiko, I don't know if you have, more information on the reception, but we've seen an interest really. We were
There has
approached
been
to translate the book. I mean, we were told this book needs to be translated. It needs to come out in Spain so that people know of the research that the wonderful collaborators have done, because it's really a collective work and everyone is bringing so much to the project. I mean, this project would not have been published without all the people who populate the book. So
as far as the reception of the English version, I mean, it came out in January, so it's too early. Our editor has said that it's selling very well, but again, it's only been a month and a half. And I think, as Aurélie was saying, once it's published in Spain in the fall, then we can actually see what kind of impact it will have. And then hopefully we can also continue with this digital project, and then but I do feel that the time has come in which I think it's also regional. Like in Catalonia, there's so much more going on there in terms of, and it's also the region with the greatest number of people who are connected to slavery and people whose ancestors are connected to slavery. So at the same time, there are more initiatives there, or have been in the last let's say 20 years or even less. So I think, I would really, of course, we can't anticipate or predict anything, but I would like to see what kind of impact the Spanish translation will have. And we really wanted to have a Spanish translation so that it's not, we're publishing with a U.S. university press. We don't want people to think that it's limited to kind of a English-speaking audience, academics in the U.S. We wanted it to reach a much broader audience from the beginning. So I don't know if we answer your question adequately or not.
Sure. Of course, it's still quite early, right?
It is early. Yeah.
My question had also something to do with the fact that sometimes I have the feeling that there's a huge gap between the research scholars community in the US and the one in Spain, actually. And Spaniard in Europe, you realize really quick that there's a methodological, also a different interest, right, in the academic community.
Yes.
That has a lot to do with whether speaking English or not, reading English or not. And we see like there's some people right now starting to work about these things in Spain, but I do sometimes have the feeling that they are not reading what has been written in English sometimes.
Well, in the case of our contributors, I mean, lots of them are in Spain, and that's why, we really wanted to make room as much as we could in just one single volume for a diverse methodology, diverse people, people from different fields. And that's why we really, we got a seed grant to translate the articles that were written in Spanish. So we, in that sense, the book was not limited to people only being able to write in English or read in English, so that, but I understand what you mean. But I think that, this collaboration proves that, people working in different fields, in different places are addressing the same topics. So,
and I just put in the link in the chat, the interview that that Sebastian Faber conducted with us about the book and in Contexto. So that's, of course, in a Spanish publication. Spanish. So hopefully, in Spanish.
It's in Spanish.
Right. So
Benita,
there it is.
Yeah.
Oh, I think Juliana was first and then Benita.
Okay,
right?
let me go with Juliana first.
Yeah.
It's okay. Thank you, Akiko, for because it's true. But I'm totally fine. It's okay. I'll just defer, and then if there's time.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Juliana, you're on the screen.
Oh, okay. Yes, I wanted to kind of circle back to the first kind of question from Alex and kind of respond to some different things and bring things together. But also couldn't ignore the idea of Ana Lucia's, the difference kind of in memory and, like disciplinary history and how, they're not exactly the same. Well, they're not the same. And yeah, I think that's a really valuable distinction and think about, the gaps in just in kind of popular society and in cultural memory and but also for historians. And then, of course, like since I am really interested in the discipline of history and kind of, in Spain or, in a kind of globalizing, like 19th century context. I mean, I think we're at a point when, historians were really, even early in the 20th century, still really doing like their nationalism, kind of pro-nationalism projects. So they're kind of limited by what they could really pursue. But I think now, finally, like not even really in the 20th, but like in the 21st century, maybe at the very end of the 20th, you do have historians that you don't only have to work for your nation state. Although, of course, yeah, that is like what Trump would like to make sure that we only have the history that works for the narrative that people want. So he wants to go back in that kind of weird neocon thing. But so I think I do really appreciate the historians' work and what they do in the archives. But yeah, I think there's something to be said about, the disciplinary formation and its influence on what was studied in the past and today. And then I also want to say, I think with Aurélie, I think that you have like a concept. I think you gave us that kind of like cosmetic of the archive. I think it's actually really interesting. I know I'm not trying to be like goody two shoes. I would like to keep talking about it. I think also like because it does something gendered, because historians with such a kind of masculinist discourse. And so I also love that kind of like inversion. So I think that's something I imagine exploring it further. But I think that is, an attempt, a concept to think about this kind of finessing and cosmetic and these gaps in the archive and in memory. So I just want I know, I guess you weren't going to say that yourself, but I think it's really interesting. Anyway, so we'll talk about it later. Thanks, guys. I'm just going to be quiet now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana. Benita, tú querías decir algo.
Yes, the way I see this book is not necessarily a book to get the public in Spain to understand the legacies of slavery, but actually to dialogue with the very projects that are being developed and have been at work for some decades now. The best evidence of that is that at least 8 of the contributors of the book are writing from Spain and have long tradition and careers already doing this type of work. And they are not only scholars, but practitioners and artists and from a variety of genres, right? The other thing is regarding like regionalism in Spain, and the book is very much focused on a Catalan kind of context, and I see that partially as the interest of the two co-editors, right? You have both been working on Catalonia mainly, but Catalonia, although relevant, it is not the only place in Spain either has been doing consistent work in this field or has been extremely relevant, right, for slavery and legacies projects. In fact, I am very happy that in the end, Akiko, after you asked me, you included, right, scholars from Seville, Miguel Ángel Rosales, Jean Caexi Grafs, right, working in that context. But Cádiz is very important, Mallorca is very important, Valencia is very important. And of course, in Madrid and in other places, they have been doing a lot of work along these same lines as well, right?
Yeah, that's why we included as well the Canary Islands. There's the case of the Canary Islands, and I mean, Ulrike chapter really.
Yeah, I was thinking Ulrike's chapter.
In her chapter, and maybe Ulrike wants to
I was
speak
thinking
because she really says, well, everyone has centered on other cities, but Madrid and Cadiz are really important, and so the value of this chapter is very high, as well as Kirsty Hooper, because I mean, in my description of the chapters, we didn't want to bore everyone, but she works with Basque. Slave traders in Liverpool, so that's another connection. So I think although Catalonia has an extremely important place for different reasons, and we make room for other parts of Spain. We have to say that when you do an edited volume, you invite people to work and they say yes or no. And so that has been also a limitation for us because we wanted to include other collaborators and in the end we could not. So those, I want to say that it's not a conscious decision to, make room or not room. It has to do as well with the fact that, you do your best in a single volume, and there's so much work to do. And this volume is also an invitation for others to continue and publish on this topic, which really there's work done, but volumes on that is, it's less. So
I also wanted to address the second, in my second part of the response, the question posed by Alex, right? Why these gaps? These historical gaps. And of course, we need to bring back, to the forefront, the history of dictatorship.
Of course.
Only the history of dictatorship, which was not interested in engaging in issues of slavery, but a dictatorship until 1975, which was very much engaged in colonialism in Africa, right?
Right, of course.
That is part of the response as well. In that regard, I am happy that my piece is there because it speaks of colonial politics within the theme of Francoism, but it is also interesting to explore the relationship between dictatorship, post-dictatorship, and colonialism engagement in slavery.
Right.
Completely.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the points we're trying to make in the introduction and throughout is how even the law of historical memory and democratic memory, the 2022 law, does not include the victims of colonial Francoism, right? In the African colonies. That's an area people are, of course, have been confronting let's say, the legacies of the Franco dictatorship and the fascism and mandated the removal of all these public symbols and monuments commemorating the fascist dictatorship and its, the people who are involved in it. But the victims of colonialism, it's almost as that's been completely elided, even from the law of democratic memory of 2022. And they were not included as the victims of colonial practices were not included as those who are eligible for reparations. So I think that says a lot. This is one area in which, historical memory of colonialism, even despite the close connection, obviously, as we know, between colonialism and Francoism, it's just an area that's been elided. So that's why we felt the need to do this work. And I was also thinking, Ulrike is here, and she's one of the historians who's worked on areas outside of Catalonia, and we all, those of you who have read her article, it's just a wonderful article. Maybe if you would like, we're not putting you on the spot, you might like to say something about, any of these questions that have been raised. Would you like to, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. May I? No. Yes. Okay.
Yes. Please.
First, thank you for the compliments. But yes, one should also work about the regions beyond Catalonia. But the problem is that, and so far, Alex really was not false. There is a lot of work not done by historians. We have in this book and in the book of Martin Rodrigo, Del Olvido a la Memoria, all the people working on it. But if you look, the group is working on Cadiz in Madrid. It's such a small group, and many things are not researched. And I agree completely with Ana Lucia Araujo that politics of memory is not about historians, and it's a much broader field. But if historians have not done certain things, not researched, you don't know it, how activists shall rely on this research. And for instance, with respect to Andalusia, you have the problem that the early slavery, of the 16th century is researched. It's researched that it's the 18th century role of Cadiz in slavery. But everything what it's related with this role of Spanish towns and slavery and enslavement of the 19th century. Everything what has consequences in, for instance, in all Spanish towns, all the things that Martin has found out, no, all Spanish banks, at least, had their first money from enslavement in Cuba and so forth. I think there are big research gaps. And the other thing is that we have not in the group of Martin, because they have doing a lot of things like this exhibition now and other. No, and he is talking, I don't know, to the media and in different events.
All the time.
All the time. But I know many Spanish historians which really think if I have written a book about a topic, then the topic is over. Okay, everything is done. They don't have the idea to connect with activists. They don't have the idea to speak to a broader public. No, I asked for instance, there's a very good book of Arturo Morgado about parties and slavery. But when I asked him, what did you do to propagate your knowledge? He said nothing. I'm an historian. I'm here in my office, and it's okay. So, and he did nothing to propagate his knowledge. And that's one problem. And the other problem is there are a lot of Spanish historians who are working, for instance, on slavery in Cuba and Puerto Rico, but they treat the topic as in history which had ended. They don't see the long-term consequences in racism or in all the capital transfer to Spain. That means a story is that it's over and we write a book about it, but it terminates something in the 19th century. They are obviously really, in one interview, Consuelo Naranjo did it. It's not necessary to bring slavery in school books. It's enough if you speak about racism. I don't know how to speak about racism if slavery isn't colonial. So, meaning the problem is inside the academia. Of course, my critique is not to the people who contributed to this volume or to the group of Martin Rio, but you must know that you can count this. With two hands, nearly you can count the people who are engaged. And then the rest, well, they have this idea of history, which has, which is passed without any consequences. And the problem is also there are many Spanish historians, I'm sorry to say that even still have a colonialist position.
No, we know that.
There was this big project of Connect Caribbean, and it's really the Spanish Instituto de Historia of the CSIC wanted to control what the Caribbean partners would do and what about they would research do. That mean they would direct what would be researched and what would be not researched and so forth. I mean, there is still a big problem in Spanish academia, and they are not relatedness to activism, to other social groups and so forth. Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Ulrike.
Meaning that's the same problem, only not to say always negative things about Spain. That's the same thing with Germany, where there's involvement in Germany and enslavement has been researched really the last 10 years, and it's not public knowledge until now. So that means everybody who knows something about German colonialism thinks about the late colonialism in Africa, but nobody speaks about the involvement of German actors since the 16th century and during all history or centuries. And meaning, that you understand me well, I do not only criticize the others, but also my own academia. But well, there's a problem, because activists have also to rely on something, or they do the research themselves. Sometimes they are doing that, of course. But I think, well, it's very important that this book will be published in Spanish, because don't read English in Spain, and I hope it will push. But I'm not too optimistic if I
thank you. I mean,
thank you so much.
We'll see.
But,
Danke, Ulrike.
Thank you so much. But can I ask one question? It's kind of directed to Ulrike, but for everyone else. So in terms of research of historians, now, like in Spain, they have to be financed by the Ministry of Culture. So I'm wondering how, like, this whole infrastructure of financing affects, like, for example, in our country at this point, we cannot apply for a National Endowment for the Humanities grant and work on certain topics any longer. And our, like slavery is surely is on Trump's ban list. So, and it may not be like that in other, hopefully in other contexts, but there's also these broader political influences, institutional realities that have an impact on what kind of research we can do, and even now in the US, what we can teach in certain states, for example. So if you're in Texas or Florida, for example, their syllabi of my colleagues are getting censored. They can't teach courses that mention things like colonialism or race. So, so that's, I guess I'm just kind of looking at the big picture too, in terms of political, whether it's under an actual dictatorship or otherwise. Ana Lucia, I think you wanted to say something here.
Yeah, no,
so
I would say, like, I understand, how can I say, as someone who has been working on, there are several places I think where we can look at. I think that in Europe, Portugal and Spain are behind, have been behind. And before the 1990s, I think that mainly all countries in Europe, they were behind. But and of course that the way that research is financed plays an important role. But the United States has very rich universities that are private and then totally funded by private funds. Then any age, if it were like, I never had any age, and this never prevented me from doing any research on slavery. Now, in countries where it's the public where we have public universities, such as Portugal, such as Spain, where France and all the other European universities, where it's the public system that funds research, then it's a totally different situation than here in the United States. Despite what is happening right now, especially then the dismantlement of this DEI, quote unquote. This it would take a lot of time to dismantle what has been done over the past 50 years. So it's a different situation, but I think that we should be thinking in terms of how, of course, the academia works and how the historians are connected to the public. Of course, that the work that historians they do informs to some extent what activists are doing, but there is not a linear connection here. But I also would say that that activists they also push historians to do a lot of this work. This is what happened in this country for many years, when the study of slavery was in the hands of a couple of white men, Southern historians doing this history, and it was African American activists and communities that, and they preserved their history. They didn't need necessarily historians to tell them how their communities were built. Of course, that this heritage in Spain perhaps is somewhat lost because it was a different context. But at the same time, like there are material traces somewhere, like everywhere in many cases, especially in the port cities. So, yes, I don't think that historians and academics will save the world regarding this issue, but I think that there is a lot that we can do with whatever we have. And especially in the United States, is much more, I would say, in terms of resources than what we have in places like Spain or Portugal.
I agree.
But it was just my 2 cents.
No, you're totally right. Very different.
We are actually coming up on time, so we are going to ask the audience. I know this is such a wonderful conversation that everybody forgot the time. We are going to ask if anybody in the audience has one parting question for us. If not, I will take the prerogative of being one of the conveners with Anna and ask the final question. So you have been warned. Remember what happened the first time I asked one question. Rosalia, I think
I have a
Rosalia much
short
better than
question,
me.
and then you can do the other one. I think this is a very interesting conversation, and thank you very much. And I'm very curious of what is going to happen from what we've seen. I talked about this connection between scholarship and activism. I'm very concerned about what's happening now globally with the far right. Growing in Germany, Ulrike knows about this, what we see in Spain, in Hungary, all over, what we see in the United States. So that on one hand can stifle some of the research because we've talked about maybe lack of funds on one hand, but it can also create more resistance and more motivation that people, activists say we have to organize. We really have to organize because we are threatened. So I'm curious to see how we go from there, because two things can happen. Yes, we're seeing it with Trump, where they're trying to control it, what is taught, what is researched, etc., etc. But it might be also a reason for more activism at all levels. So we'll see. Next time we get together, we'll see what happens. So
I think the importance of both, activism and scholarship and is the construction of an archive. I mean, we were talking about that. I mean, our participation in raising questions so that we don't end up with an archive that forgets, that doesn't, include certain things. So in this sense, both, that production of knowledge in different ways, different practices, is valuable. And as you see, we'll see, I'm also curious. I have the same question as you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question, Rosalia.
Yeah, thank you, Rosalia, for your question. That is the big question on all of our minds. So let's go ahead and actually finish on that note. So hold on a second. I am going to bring in my host, Anna, my co-host, Anna, so we can talk a little bit about the future. But before we part, I just wanted to ask you to join me in praising Aurélie and Akiko for this wonderful collection. There's so much to love about it, beyond having sparking the kinds of conversations that they sparked with us today, that I saw sparked a couple of weeks ago here at Yale in person. Thank you so much. I think, of course, I will praise forever the interdisciplinarity. Maybe with that word, maybe it's out of fashion now. I don't know. But I just love the way that not only do you bring all these different genres together and sectors together, but that each of the individual contributions themselves kind of reflect that. For example, I'm thinking of Benita reading, the governmental and the literary together, so that we can get a sense of the voice. And that's just the first chapter. And then every other chapter continues like this, combining the different archives, combining the different genres. And I think it's a reflection of the book's reach and scope, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to teach, methodology or a global, holistic view of how one goes about studying these things. Thank you so much for this gift you have given us, Aurélie and Akiko.
Thank you so much for creating. Thank you so much for creating this forum for discussing, our book and books of other people who write on the topic of slavery. So, thank you, Ana Lucia, and thank you, Alex.
Thank you, and I just want to reinforce what Alex said, because I think that one of the beautiful things about this book is that the book captures what memory is in terms of bringing these different perspectives. That is not only what scholars and academics are doing. Then, and sometimes, of course, it's difficult to capture this and put this in an object that is a written object just. But what you'll be doing, and this I find also fantastic, and of course that this is dialogue with the exhibitions that you mentioned and so on. but the digital dimension of what you plan to do, I do think that this is a way that can really capture even more how memory is multidimensional, and we need these different voices and these different actors. So I think that is a model on how to do this kind of work, the work that you did here. And of course, the Spanish case, there is so much to discuss that I don't think that we even touch the beginning. But I hope that we'll have more opportunities to do so. Even here, like we have Chloe Ayrton will come in May. And we are having more that we are just centering a little bit the United States during this this year, and it was really a pleasure to
Acosta
have you.
in the fall will also touch about those early imperial contacts in the 16th century, because we also talk a lot about Spain, the 19th century, but we need to go deep, and I think Lisette will be here with us in the fall. So yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Yes,
and
for
your words, Ana Lucia. Thank you very much for
and I
your
invite
reading
you
of the
that we
book.
have the next one that is going to be in March 29. That is the driver's story with Randy Brown, and we'll be then disseminating the information. But what is nice also is that today we also had a different audience, because you never have the same people coming, and we had also Mr. Pickles, who is just behind Alex. Making his introduction today, because he wasn't here like in the past ones.
So do you hold this every month, or how frequently are
I'm gonna
these
put the
group?
schedule in it's almost every 3 weeks.
Is there a schedule? That'll be great to have.
I'm gonna put the schedule together for everybody in the audience this is the first time. So like Ana said, it depends. It's something that we've been trying to kind of like get everybody in the Anglophone, Hispanophone, Francophone, Lusophone traditions and different regions to come together, right? But it's the audiences tend to gravitate towards their region, right? So sometimes I hope that all the people here for the Hispanophone, I'm looking for the link. It's slaveryarchive.com. You already put it in there?
I am putting.
Okay.
Oops.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So
is
the
there
idea,
a way we can,
hopefully we will have more Hispanophone people working on the Black Atlantic slavery memory, and the Hispanophone can come. I have it here. Hold on.
Okay, because
okay, I did it now.
I feel like okay. Can we save these links and stuff or not? I don't know about this.
I think that you can download the chat.
And you can download the whole chat. Yeah. But also if you click on it now and favorite
I don't
it,
know
that would
where
work.
you
I think that there is
that
a
whole
square.
schedule.
Oh, there it is. You know where there's 3 dots. That's where you save chat for everyone else who wants to. Okay, I got it.
And also, notice that everything in that schedule, you can register already because it's all like Zoom. So you can actually register it through
until
the rest
November.
Until November, you can register for anyone, and it will be added to your calendar automatically. So there's that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And notice the variety, right?
You need to register for each one. Yes.
Okay.
Notice how the geographical and temporal range and methodological range that we are like you. We believe also in like trying to come at this from all the different possible angles, because I think that does give us a more complete picture. Right? And I think our understanding and conversations will be better the more capacious we are.
Okay. Great.
Like you. Same like you.
Well,
and thank you very much.
Thanks to both of you. And I just wanted to thank also the contributors who showed up today, Ulrike and Juliana, Benita, Rosalia.
And Miguel
Angel, of course, Aurélie. Yes. Is he there? Oh, I didn't see him. I'm sorry. Okay.
Then I am adding the contributors who are here.
Yeah,
Rosalia is also here.
And Miguel Angel Rosales.
Oh, great. There's Miguel Angel.
Miguel, he has the camera off, but I try to add him.
I'm sorry, I was too late. I was really late, so I just connected a few minutes ago. But I want to say hello and to have a little bit of the conversation. I don't take my camera on because the connection is really bad, so I'm afraid if I take it on, it probably will cut. But thank you very much for the book, and thank you very much for this wonderful meeting. I'm really happy to almost hear the last of the conversation. I'm really happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank you,
everyone.
Miguel
And
Gracias,
we
Miguel
are recording
Ángel.
the session, and it's going to be on YouTube like between now and tomorrow morning. Then those who
great.
were not able to make it, you'll be there because something
Oh,
happened
okay.
here. Again, there was an error. I could not broadcast on YouTube, but it's going to be uploaded there. Then you just can tell to the contributors that you'll be there.
Oh, okay, great.
So, yes.
Thank
so
you.
Emilio, remember to tell people who are not reading the English stuff to come and be in the club when we talk about the books being written in English. Okay.
I will.
Well, thank you, everybody. Aurélie, please stay in the call. Anna, can you stay for 2 seconds?